50th anniversary this year. And as that happens, we're thinking about what do we need to be doing to communicate out to our members what it is we do. And my background was in municipal law and legislative work. So I spent a lot of time in front of city officials telling them things about municipal law. And because of that, I became kind of a good candidate to be an outreach person about what the pool does. So that's what I do at the pool. And typically I do that by going to speak at any engagement I can get to get in front of our city officials anywhere I can, conferences, trainings, anything I can do. And one of the things that we also decided to do was do a podcast. And so we do something called the Local Officials Stronger Together podcast, which is about a 15-minute episode that we do on typically coverage issues or legal issues. Most of them are pretty lighthearted. And we internally at the pool are starting to really work in earnest on our leadership and development training. And of course, we're working with SGR to do upcoming servant leadership trainings. And I wanted to just do a podcast that anyone could listen to, but mainly internal folks at our pool could listen to learn about what servant leadership is. And we hear that term a lot in modern days. But I was thinking, who could I interview? Could I interview Ron Holyfield? Could I interview Mike? Who in this business would be good to do an interview for this podcast? And then it occurred to me, well, Dad knew Robert Greenleaf, the man who created the principle of servant leadership and wrote about it. He was introduced to the concept the year I was born in 1972. And Dad practiced that all throughout our lives. And I guess I really never thought about the title of what it was. And you said it's even been recent since SGR started using that terminology the last 10 or so years. And it's just a way of living your life in your business, in your friendships, in your family that helps everyone around you become better. And Dad has really been quite the practitioner of that. And he served in his company at TDI for about 53 years, including as president, being on the board, started out as basically a helper. And that company helped shape the skyline of Dallas, other cities around the country. Under Dad and a couple of his compadres' leadership, TD Industries is an employee-owned company that has grown to annual revenues over $700 million a year and 2,700 employees. They call them TD partners. And so Dad is now 88 years old. Dad's on the podcast with us. He's 88 and I'm 52. He can still work me under the table any day of the week and twice on Sunday at his cattle ranch up in East Texas. He's sharp as a tack. Well, pretty sharp, maybe not sharp as a tack. He's sharp. And I just thought it would be cool to talk to him for my podcast about servant leadership. And that's how this came about, right? Y'all heard it and thought it might be fun to talk a little bit more about to Dad because of that deep knowledge he has of the subject. So that's a little bit long, Mike. I'm sorry, but that's
No, no, that's not long at all. Thank you. And welcome, Ben, to the show. And man, it's such an honor to get to talk with you. And as I was mentioning earlier, when we at SGR started really diving into servant leadership, and I don't know that it wasn't that we changed our material. It was that we just started packaging it under those terms, but it gave us a way to describe what we believed about leadership and service in the public sector, in the private sector, and elsewhere. We ran into the name TD Industries right away because of your long-term connection with Robert Greenleaf. So we're really anxious to hear your perspectives and what was that like? So I just want to start with that question. You knew Bob Greenleaf. What was it like to work with him? And what are some of your recollections of his teachings that really impacted you?
Well, first of all, the way we got to know Robert is our founder, Jack Lowe Sr., was a natural servant leader. He read the pamphlet and he liked it so much that he bought a whole bunch of pamphlets. And then the management team, about a dozen of us, went through the pamphlet one paragraph, one page at a time, collectively to learn the message. And then we each took it back to our groups and took our groups through it, and then so forth until it had gone through the whole company. And one is the interest that Robert Mealeaf developed in us was because we were buying more pamphlets than anybody in the world. And so as we had read all these pamphlets, he called Jack and said, "What are you doing with the pamphlets?" And I just told you what we were doing with them. Well, to tell you a little bit about Robert personally, I believe Robert was Quaker, and at least he had those tendencies. And he would come to visit with our management group in Dallas when he was able. His wife, Esther, actually painted a picture that for a long time resided on the steps in our headquarters building. And Esther did that picture. Well, he would come and would sit with us and talk with us and listen to us. And one of Robert's first characteristics of servant leadership is listening. And he would do an incredible amount of listening. And he has something else someplace in his writings that says something about if you speak, you have to know that it's going to improve the sound. And so he would remain silent a lot and just say a couple of 3 words. And they might be, as he was talking to a management group, they might be, says, "Sounds like you have a good program going, but it looks like you need someone looking at the horizon, someone looking at the future, looking at those traps that might," he never used this many words, but those traps that might lay ahead of you and those opportunities with which you can excel. So in the later years, I'll just close it out this way, Mike. In the later years, he and Esther could no longer travel. And he lived in Pennsylvania, and we would travel to Pennsylvania and meet with him there. Esther became ill, but he would come to a motel meeting room and meet with our management group. So that's sort of how it began.
It's really fascinating because, Scott, you mentioned this company, TDI, $700 million in revenue. Sometimes we hear annual revenue. Sometimes we hear people mischaracterize servant leadership, like it's sort of touchy-feely, not really focused on the results. But, you got $700 million in annual revenue. You're focused on some results. How did it help you focus on results in your long tenure there?
Well, one of the first things that as we began to grow, that we found was we would take lead mechanics in the field. And as we needed bigger and bigger crews, they would be promoted to run a crew. And they were unskilled in working with people. They were skilled with working with their hands, wonderful people. And so what we found was they would reach a point where they were feeling unsuccessful and would actually leave our company and go someplace else where they could go back to being a mechanic. And I think I have to credit Jack Lowe Sr. with saying we need to help these individuals become leaders, and there's no better path than servant leadership. And so at first we did the pamphlet, then Jack Sr. actually went and had meetings of employees. You couldn't be with your supervisor. That was the only rule at his house. We probably at this time had 250 employees, and Harriet, his wife, would make spaghetti, and they would just talk all morning long. And we would learn, the company would learn. Each one of us participated, but not with anyone that worked for us. And we would learn the things that we were finding that we were not doing as servant leaders. And so that began the process. And if you permit me to go just a little farther, it then developed into orientation for any employee included servant leadership, an hour or 2 of servant leadership. Then it progressed so that the second year there was a day of servant leadership. The third year was valuing differences. Some people call it diversity. We prefer valuing differences. And then was another dose of servant leadership and then Covey's 7 Habits, and then Crucial Conversations, and then later on the Heart Styles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that and then that just repeated. So people had, and now people that came in that could sometimes be advanced through that process to help them really come to grips with how to be a true servant leader.
Mike, if I could just mention,
Yeah.
when we're getting ready to start, we talked a little bit about, Dad wanted me to get off his payroll when I was in college, and I needed a job, for summers, and I said, well, can I come work for TD? He said, no, I don't want you on my payroll. I want you on somebody else's payroll. And so he did have a connection at a really prestigious electrical contractor that worked hand in hand with TD on much of their big projects. Texas Instruments headquarters, for example, in Dallas. And I was on those job sites working for a really good electrical contractor that was a very good place to work. But the difference was palpable about the folks who worked at TD. These are welders and plumbers and material handlers that I'm interacting with on a job site, and just their attitude about what they were doing and why they were there. You could tell. You could tell that they were part of something, and they felt like they were part of something, and they wanted to do the best they could for themselves and the company. So it was pretty cool to see.
Yeah, what a great impact. Krista, I know you've been a part of SGR, that transition where we began to package things under the umbrella of servant leadership. I want to throw it over to you. I know you've probably got some questions you want to ask or an observation.
Sure, yeah. So I obviously find this topic near and dear to my heart and very fascinating as well. And one of the things, and Mike and I have talked about this a little bit, but I think in all of the servant leadership teachings that apply so well to professional life, I also take those to heart for my personal life too. And so I'm kind of curious, maybe Scott, if you want to weigh in, and then Ben after that, but what was it like growing up with a dad who practiced these principles?
Well, probably if you turn that around, it was probably pretty hard for Dad to be my dad, because I I had a few run-ins with the law. I had a few setbacks throughout my life, and but I was able to rely on what the things that Dad had done. He talked about being on the board of the YMCA camp at Possum Kingdom, and we went there. We went canoeing, and we learned how to live off the land, and we went to the farm, and we helped him work the cattle and all those things. Went on trips, and Dad worked a lot. He had a full plate, but he was the kind of dad that would work. And if you knew I had a little league game, he would get there, and it might not be in the first inning, but it'd probably be the second or the third inning. And some of the other dads would be in their shorts and t-shirts, and Dad would come and he'd still have his suit on, but he'd be there and he'd get there, and he would show by example how much he cared about us. And one of the things that he did, which I'm not really sure it's even servant leadership necessarily, but it's sort of that wheel of life thing. And I don't know where that comes from. There's many experts, I guess, but it's, you carve your life up into different pies, your personal relationships, your community service, your religious or spiritual, your work, your family. And we would sit down at least once a year and talk about those things and talk about those goals, just to be a better person and to be a better member of society. And I remember doing that. I really hated it when I was a teenager, but it really got to be something really, really special as we worked forward. And I remember when I was in college, we wrote down. He said, if you don't write it down, it's not going to happen. And I wrote down, I want to make $100,000 a year. I remember that. And of course, when I started at TML in 2000 as a baby attorney, I made $34,000. But at some point, not too far down the road, I was making pretty good money, and it came from the work, not from anything else. So Dad was always there and always led us by example and taught us things that even at that time might not have been in vogue. Never use the N word is something I can remember, because that wasn't unusual, even in the 80s growing up. And, he would not tolerate that. You get a good smack with that, but So just the way that he led by example, um, it's been really special, and ultimately things have worked out pretty well after a rocky start.
I love what you're
You made
saying
it, and that's what
because,
counts.
yeah, we talk about how, and there's that tension in servant leadership. Of on the one hand, you do care about nurturing healthy relationships, and on the other hand, you care about, you know, innovation, excellence, and execution. You care about the things people become, the things your organization becomes, and there's always that tension there. And you got to Ben. Did he ever test your patience with like, I don't know if this servant leadership stuff works after all?
Not, he really didn't, because he just was helping me to get to know the police force very, very well. And so, and so that was a growth experience. Uh, I don't think Scott ever really tested much. His brother tested a little more than he did, but of course, young kids want to become more autonomous and more independent, and that's part of life, and we don't want to stop it. We may want to curtail it so that it's within appropriate boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
But it does bring me maybe I'll let you go forward, but it brings me to one of the challenges of leadership, and you spoke to it a little bit earlier, and that is balancing the servant leadership component, which definitely has a soft component, with I hate to use tough love because some people find it offensive, but with the requirement to produce and to be able to do things that sometimes you don't want to. And I have a couple of examples at TD Industries that came from Jack Lowe Sr. I got a bunch with myself, but I'll share his.
Yeah.
We You have to lead and innovate. And what he did is had seen Trammell Crow, our biggest customer at that time, who's now deceased, the world's largest developer, and he had seen Trammell's offices, which is just a whole floor with conference rooms in the corner, and Trammell had a roll top in the middle, and he could see everybody, wave to him, walk over to him immediately. And so Jack saw that, and he said, we can learn by being able to be a team and working with each other openly, and we don't have to have secrets. If we really have something that's very personal, the conference rooms are there. Well, we didn't quite go that far, but he, being very inclusive, had the management team go to different facilities that had standard offices with partitions, and then to those that had low partitions and those that had no partitions.
Mm.
And when it came down to the end, he let us take a vote. The management group, as I recall, had 18 people in it. And the vote was either fixed partitions or open office concept. And the vote was 17 for fixed partitions and 1 for open office. The 1 was the chairman, and it won. And so 17 to 1, and he made the decision, and we went forward and expected acceptance of that approach. I've got other similar stories. There are not many times that he could not reach a consensus.
Mm-hmm.
But when he did not hesitate to step up and do what a leader must do when he knows it's right. Seatbelts was another example. Everybody's saying they're too hot, they burned my neck, and he interviewed everybody. And when he finally came back to the decisions, he says, well, we don't want to violate anyone's independent rights. We don't want to take your right away to be able to not have a seatbelt on. So the decision is going to be, if you don't wear seatbelts, you don't have a company car.
Well, I love that because, sometimes kind of like we're talking about, I see this mistake sometimes in leaders. They want to be a servant leader and they interpret that as meaning it's their job to do the other person's job for them. And that's not the case. That's really not really helping that person down the road. We kind of joked a little bit about you're telling Scott, get off my payroll and get your own, but that's kind of what you were doing, is saying, look, it's not my job to support you for your whole life. You gotta work forward that.
Mike, what I remember what
the,
Dad talked about with the office space setup they had. Right now, the risk pool has a visioning for our future offices, and complex process going on, and we see a lot of that kind of stuff. But I remember as a little kid, if Dad had to go to the office for some reason on Saturday or whatever, he would just take me with, and we'd hang out together, and he'd do a few things, and I'd play around in the office. And I just remember saying, "Well, Dad, why don't you have a big? Why is your office right next to the secretary, they called it at the time, or why? How come you don't have a big corner office?" And he explained why, because we're all here to work together, and we don't want people to be uh, uh, those walls between us.
Yeah.
I really like that, what you said earlier, but I think there is a balance, and I think it is explained if you really look at those principles of servant leadership. But I think that like accountability piece is kind of what you were getting at, maybe, Mike and Scott a little bit too. But I think that is part of being a servant leader, is to hold people accountable, encourage them, help them do better. But it's also about holding them accountable and getting them off your payroll when you're supposed to, or letting them do their job on their own, but I think that that piece is critical. And I think that's what I've seen sometimes, is that kind of like what you were saying, Ben, there's that soft, nurturing component of servant leadership. But I think sometimes it's easy to forget that there's also that holding people accountable component as well.
I'll give you a
thank,
perfect
thank,
example of that. When I went off to school, my first year of college, I was asked to come home after that year. I was asked to leave politely, and I came home, and Dad and I had a long talk, and he said, you know, I'm going to give you one more chance, and you're going to go to the community college here, and you're going to make A's. And if you don't make A's, I'm going to ask you to leave this house. And that's pretty serious, right? And it worked.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think next webinar is going to be Scott's college life.
It'd have to be R-rated, probably X-rated.
Lots of lessons.
I would lead to the same point, and that's part of what led us to crucial conversations as a component of our training.
Mm-hmm.
People have difficulty in coming to grips and keeping someone understanding that it's positive, but we have to change things, and it's important to you and to the company that you make these changes. And sometimes that's, I have a secretary or administrative assistant today, and she had a young lady that was having trouble doing a job. And so she would say, uh, let's call her Amy. Amy, you did great at this, but you're missing on this.
Mm.
And finally, one day she came to me and she says, I'm calling Amy in, and I'm going to say, Amy, we're not going to talk about anything good. Today, we're going to only talk about bad because you're not hearing the good. And
It's interesting. I want to go back because Scott was telling us earlier, Ben started work for TDI in 1961, and he left the board as the board of directors when he was 78 years old. So we have a long span of activity. Included time he was the president of the national the ABC, American Builders Building Contractors.
Associated Builders and Contractors, yeah.
So Scott, tell that story about going to that conference with him, because I think it was really meaningful and moving, having people come and talk to you about your dad.
Well, Dad was national president of ABC in 1996. I was in law school then. My brother and I got to do his swearing in ceremony, which was kind of cool. And then he was invited back. Dad was invited back last year to go to Palm Springs for their annual conference to receive one of their Lifetime Achievement Awards. And these are big, big conferences, thousands of people. It's a lot of people. And that time and any other time I go to an event where Dad's being recognized, people come up to me and my brother and just pull us aside and say how much dad did to further their careers and how much he helped them through a tough time. And some of them, it was, that they needed to have the confidence to be a leader for their organization. Some of it was they needed to quit drinking to be that leader. It was so many different things, but there's so many people. I mean, dozens of people come up to us and just take the time to pull us aside and say how much of an impact dad had in their lives. And it's really touching because it's a lot of people, a lot of people.
That's a greatest legacy you could have. Ben, did you realize that that was happening at the time?
Of course not. And I would say part of my philosophy, and I think of servant leadership, is stretch. You know that they can do more than they think they can do. This can do thing keeps coming to play. And 90% of the time, they can do more than they think they can do. And they are so elated when they succeed. I'll give you a brief example. I had an administrative assistant, and I had to have a lot of administrative assistants because I'm ADD, literally, in fact. And so I'm almost like schizophrenic, and I have to have somebody to really anchor me. And then my next tier are extremely capable people, much more capable than I am. And Elise was one of those extremely capable people. And she was the administrative, she was the chair of the administrative staff association of this association locally in Texas. And she came to me and she said, Ben, I'd like to have George W. Bush come speak at our support staff conference. And I looked at the time we were doing the ballpark, and he was the managing partner. I said, Elise, you can do a better job of getting Bush than I can. And I said, I'll help you if you need it, but I don't think you need me. I think he'll respond more to you and to the administrative staff group that you chair than he will to me. And he did. And I got the benefit of sitting at the head table with Bush on one side and Elise on the other. So it's she stretched, she met it, and how proud she was that she did it on her own.
Yeah, yeah, that's a powerful story. And our CEO Ron Hollifield often says, it's not about me, and it's not about now, and it never is. And that, to me, when a leader can really embody that, which is what you did, and they can step up when they need to and do what needs to be done, but they're not afraid to step back and to let somebody else be in the limelight. And insecure people can't do that because they always need to get the accolades for themselves. But people that are truly servant leaders empower others, and they go farther than we could imagine, and they celebrate that.
Agreed.
Scott, you have, I know, tried to emulate many of these things. What's it been like for you? And I mean, none of us do this perfectly, of course, but what's it been like for you to try to follow that example as a servant leader that you've seen in your dad?
Especially at work, it just seemed like it came naturally to act in that way. And I guess that's because that's how I was raised for how you treat people. But I had a team of 4 to 5 lawyers working for me back at the state league when I worked there, and wanting them to succeed was the main reason I was there. And it was so fun to do like dad said and show them how that they were capable of doing anything they ever wanted to do, and I'm really proud of the fact that the one of the attorneys who worked for me is now the general counsel at the league. One of them is the city attorney of Dripping Springs. One is the assistant city attorney in Louisville. One of them is on the attorney general's AG opinion committee. That's just such a great feeling to me. It's just so cool to see them succeed. And just if I had one small part in that, it's really humbling.
Scott or Ben, this is a question for either of you. Have you ever found yourself like working with somebody or working on something and realize, wait, I'm not really going by those principles I believe in, and I got to back up and come at it from a servant leadership approach. And so we say this is what we want to do, but we don't always do it. And then can you think of a time where you had to do that and back up and say, let me come at it another way?
Dad, you do that one. Okay, well, there are probably too many of them. One of my personal flaws is not listening well enough all the way through to the end of the communication. And so, and then sometimes come into a snap opinion that I pre-formed while the other person is speaking, instead of Covey's seek first to be understood. I mean, to understand, then to be understood. And that's a flaw. So I've had quite a few times that in my career, and occasionally now, where I snap to a judgment, and then I realized I wasn't operating as a servant leadership and listening all the way through, and was too quick to judge, too quick to snap, and had to back up and apologize. I owe Scott one right now. He called me about a political candidate the other day and was kind of tempering my thoughts about the candidate. The candidate will remain unnamed. And Scott, I think you were right. I think I was snapping to some judgments that weren't appropriate at this time, and in this very controversial time in our country. We have to listen as best as we can to everything that's going on. Mike, I would say a couple of things do come to my mind. Generally, we are taught by servant leadership, crucial everything, to commend in public and to criticize or correct in private. But I find there are at least a couple of times when it is appropriate to speak quickly, and it's the two times are items of safety and items of ethics. Mm. And I feel like if someone brings up something in a group setting that is not safety oriented, it must be addressed as best as you can without offending a person, but don't back off of the importance of safety. That's one. Number two, if it's an ethical issue, it is exactly the same. You need to be as courteous as you can be, but you must be firm, and you must not wait. If you wait, people think that you condone that action. And I think a leader has to do that as a servant leader to show the way we want to run our lives.
Yeah, that's a great observation, and so spot on. And it's about courage, particularly when it comes to this ethics. That leadership requires courage, and when you have someone raise an ethical issue, just like Scott, you saying, okay, Dad wouldn't permit the use of the N word, that's an ethical issue, and he responded to that quickly, and that taught you. And if he didn't, that also teaches you, but the wrong thing. So I know you got a story you want to close with in a minute, Ben, but before we get to that, we've got a question that came in about the book Crucial Conversations. How do you master the tools in that book with the concept of servant leadership when the party you need to talk to doesn't have those tools, doesn't embrace them, maybe doesn't know about them? How do you do that crucial conversations thing when the person is kind of, let's say, just unaware of those?
To answer your question, I don't know this is a great answer, but what I would do is try and deal with the crucial conversation with courtesy and respect, but be firm on the subjects. That's the only thing. I mean, really, servant leadership is courtesy and respect. And it's courtesy and respect for all people. And that's what valuing differences is. And in this particular instance, there's a difference there which is possible to espouse. So firmly, but with courtesy and respect is the best. Scott, have you got a better idea?
I would just say, how do I say it? I would say that, I think the question is, if this person doesn't have the values that you have or the servant leadership skills or understands how to have respectful conversations, I think you just have to start, because that person has to be given an example of what those are to even begin to move forward.
Yeah, yeah, very good one. Chris, I know we got another question come in. I'll let you address that question to them, and then we'll wrap it up with Ben's closing story.
Perfect. I was about to call Tommy out for not asking a question, because we can always count on him to participate and ask good questions. So his question is, Ben and Scott, when setting expectations with a team or a new teammate, do you allow this to be a conversation for buy-in or a direct communication?
I'll attack it if Scott, unless you want to go first.
You go.
First of all, I want to say the term buy-in is a little bit offensive. I don't mean to offend the person that made the question, but it implies that I already know the answer and I'm going to sell that answer to somebody else. And so what I prefer to do is to put up what we try at TD to do is put a straw man, and that is a possible solution, and then discuss the possible solution to see how to move forward. And I've never seen us try that something doesn't come out of the group that helps it be a better solution. Somebody talked about third solutions. Well, it almost all generates the input of smart people generates a better answer than the first straw man. And we don't like to go for buy-in. We like to go to a straw man and improve. And we're imperfect on that too, Mike.
Yeah, I was thinking you reminded me. I had a mentor who I was actually a supervisor, but he was really a mentor to me. And I would be leading a staff meeting, and he would say sometimes, Mike, one option is, and he would lay out this perfect plan, but he did it in a way that he made it easy for me to come back and say, okay, I want to do this. He could have easily said, what we ought to do is, and he would have been right 99% of the time, but he never did it that way. He was a great leader, and I so benefited from it. This has been a really fascinating conversation for us, Scott and Ben. We want to thank you so much. I've learned some things. I know, Chris, you've probably gotten some things out of this too. And I hate to bring it to an end, but we try to honor time. And I know, Ben, you had a story you wanted to share. So before we close out, let's hear that story that you had on your heart you wanted to share.
Well, I'm going to change my story. The story I was going to tell was about J.R. Bumpus, and maybe I can thumbnail. J.R. was a superintendent for us. He was a servant leader, and he passed away. And his family asked if they could have his memorial service in our large meeting room in Houston. And J.R. family, these three stories were told. Number one, Peter Barra, who is now a superintendent at TD Industries, said that when he came on the job the first day, if I get choked up here, I know these guys. Pete came to the job the first day, and his steel-toed boots had the metals thrown through them. And JR went and said, son, you can't have these boots on this job because they're unsafe. That steel may pop out and you get an injured foot. And he said, well, Mr. Bumpus, I don't have enough money to buy a pair of boots. They 4 o'clock, he said, see me at 4, and they disappeared. They thought he was going to be fired. The next day, he shows up with a brand new pair of boots, which JR paid for personally. Today, we furnish boots. But the second thing is a family story. Like I said, Ibarra became a superintendent, ran multi-story buildings and hospitals for us. It just came time for his 20th anniversary, and we were giving Rolex watches at that time, And he came to his supervisor, the manager there, and said, you know, Marcia, my wife has never had anything. We've had foster kids and we just had money for jewelry. Could I have my 20-year watch to be a lady's watch? And he wrote from JR to Marcia. And of course, his manager did that immediately. Family. And last was these are true stories told in the funeral service. I mean, the last was a welder, and he was on an equipment room, and he said, JR came to the equipment room. He says, guys, we have to finish this equipment room by Friday next week. And he said, my God, JR, we can't do that. We need more manpower. Rome wasn't built in a day. And JR paused and he said, do you know why Rome wasn't built in a day? He said, no, why? He said, because I wasn't the superintendent. and the welder proudly said, we finished the job the next Friday in budget and we didn't get any more men. So that you have to have high expectations and expect performance.
That's great. I can't think of a better set of three stories that really capture the essence of servant leadership and its broad application. So, Ben, we can't thank you enough for your time and your service and the example of servant leadership that obviously Scott's benefited from, but many people, and now we are too. And we just really appreciate you and want to thank you for that. Scott, likewise, man, my friend, what a gold jewel you've shared with us today, and we really appreciate you for that.
Thank y'all, and thank you, Bob.
Thank you very much, Mike, Carissa, Lisa, Tim. Appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it's been great. Thank you guys so much. Carissa, anything else to close out?
We do you want me to share the link for next week's webinar?
Yes, we have Micah Gaudet that'll be back with us. We're so excited to hear from Micah again. He'll be talking about artificial intelligence and city clerks. So how can AI help with the work of city clerks, city secretaries is a huge issue. And I can't wait to hear from Micah about that. So if you're not signed up, you can do so and spread that word to the city secretary in your organization as well. So thank you, everybody that's been a part of this one, and we'll see you down the road.
Thanks.
After you're signing off, thank you very much. I had one subject that I thought I might just share with just you.
Yeah.
If you wanted to after you're signed off.
Sure.
I mean, I can share with the group, but I just wanted to be sure.
Fine. Go ahead. I think that most people are signing off, so it's okay.
The subject came from one of the servant leadership conferences, and it is trust. And we didn't address trust very much today, but it's such a huge part of servant leadership. That is trust between you and the person that works with you, trust between them and you in reverse, trust between your client